the media manager for the Duxbury Senior Center. We'll be talking about this book, Take Me Home, Huey, which is a beautiful book about the Take Me Home, Huey project that was started by artist Steve Maloney. First, I want to shout out to our partners for the events. For all of our author events, we partner with the Duxbury Free Library, which we are happy to announce is back open and in full swing, and represented today by Suzanne Gunnarsson, who is the circulation director, and she's here on this call. And we also partner with Booked, Duxbury's popped up bookshop. So look for Booked to be popping up soon at Island Creek Oysters at the bar and at Pine Hills and Duxbury. Both will be in June. Booked will be happy to order you a copy of the book. Chris is going to put their information in the chat. You can just email them or call them. And if you live nearby, they'll even deliver the book to you. If not, they can mail it. So always good to support our partners and independent bookstores. So feel free throughout the presentation to put questions in the chat or leave comments about your experience if you want. We'll have a chance at the end to get to the questions and comments after the presentation. Also, by attending, your names are all entered in a raffle, and the winner will receive a copy of this book, and we'll announce the winner after the presentation as well. So a little background. To commemorate the 50th anniversary of the Vietnam War, artist Steve Maloney transformed the fuselage of a Boneyard medevac helicopter into what became a multimedia project, Take Me Home, Huey. This book, which is co-written by our guest speaker, Clare Nolan, documents his journey in creating and sharing his work. Sadly, Steve passed away suddenly earlier this year, right after this book was published. He called this project the proudest thing I have ever done. And the sculpture he created from the Huey, he said, was his destiny. And he dedicated the book to the 2.7 million Americans who served in Vietnam. We are grateful to have his co-author, Clare Nolan, here to share Steve's story and the story of the transformed Huey. And I'll give you a little background about Clare, because she's really impressive too. Clare Nolan has been featured globally on the National Geographic and Discovery channels. In 1996, the Discovery Channel documentary, Hugging the Deck, Clare told the unknown story of the bloodiest naval air squadron in the Vietnam War. Among the brave and highly decorated veterans featured in the documentary were Medal of Honor recipient James Stockdale and U.S. Senator John McCain, both of whom were shot down over North Vietnam and spent years as prisoners of war. Over the course of her 2 decades as a reporter, writer, documentary filmmaker, Clare has tackled a wide range of topics from architecture, archaeology, and public policy to the wonders of the national world. She currently lives in Washington, D.C. Welcome, Clare, and thank you again for being here.
Thank you for having me. Good afternoon, everybody. It's a real pleasure to be speaking to you today about the Take Me Home, Huey book and sculpture and really multimedia project. Take Me Home, Huey is a fine art book about an artist's journey, and I have a presentation about the artist and the book that I would like to show you as I talk. So I'm going to load that up. And Brooke, is that visible?
Yeah, that looks great. That looks great.
Okay, great. So Take Me Home, Huey started as a sculpture. And the book is really about how this idea for an artwork evolved into something much, much more. We selected 180 photographs for the book, which are both historical about the Vietnam, the helicopter war, and also the project, and then how the project evolved into a traveling exhibition, and then a film and a song. And it really begins with the contemporary artist, Steve Maloney's idea to create an artwork for the 50th anniversary commemoration of the Vietnam War. And he decided, to use a Huey helicopter. and with the name, which he dubbed Take Me Home, Huey. And through this sculpture, he found that he really created a connection and conversation among veterans in a way that he really didn't expect. So the story of this project that's told in the book is really about how art is a catalyst for connection, conversation, and healing. And it's not an exaggeration to say that this is an artwork that saved lives. After Steve finished the sculpture in 2015, he took it on a tour to 13 states and 29 venues. He wanted it to be seen by as many veterans as possible. And he documented that process on video. So in this talk, I'm going to let you hear from Steve in his own words. And here is the first video.
Well, I grew up in southern Michigan, Kalamazoo to be exact, with artist parents. And my mother painted and drew and used a lot of charcoal and actually did some sculpture out of stone. So I was surrounded by it. And then later in life, when I had an opportunity, I thought, well, wouldn't it be great if I could get some coaching and some lessons? And so I did. One thing kind of led to another. I would experiment with different styles and express myself the best way I could, and had a lot of fun with it. And the greatest part is it makes me feel good. One advantage I think that I have is I know kind of how a lot of things work and how they're fastened together and what materials I can use. So I'm not afraid to experiment. I was at the Palm Springs Air Museum looking for some parts to make art out of, and discovered this old Bell Jet Ranger. The Rydam copter piece, all blinged out, inspired by Glenn Campbell and Rhinestone Cowboy. It was just awesome having something that big. And that gave me a lot of confidence that I could go on with another helicopter, but totally different. This was a real warbird for sure, and we all should pay homage to what it did during the Vietnam War with these guys, and over 40,000 pilots trained to fly them. I was really concerned how this was going to affect people. I mean, the last thing I wanted to be was run out of town because I offended someone with what I did. And I thought, okay, Maloney, you've only got one chance to get it right. Can you really make art out of a helicopter? You know, how far can you go? How far can you take it? And how is it going to be received?
Yeah, when we saw it completed, it was just, oh my God, you know, it was so beautiful. And it still is to this day, you know.
Thank you. And I couldn't be prouder. I'll tell you, I just couldn't be prouder. I had no idea that a piece of my art would take such a path. From traveling a helicopter around to different venues across the country, I learned that it truly was a conversation starter, a trigger for people to talk about their feelings about when they were in service and then struggling, I think, afterwards.
The world is going to remember Steve. I mean, you've done so many other things, but this is your big thing. It's like everybody has one thing that stands above everything else, and this is your pivotal moment, Steve. I mean, this will last for eons. It'll be in that museum for 100 years. It's been quite a journey to think about what I could do as an artist, and I think it's worked out very, very well.
So Steve did serve in the Army. He was in the Michigan National Guard from 1963 to 69, but he was never deployed overseas. And but he knew men that in basic training that went on to have careers in the Army and serve in Vietnam, and he followed the war closely. And he was particularly struck by the poor reception that veterans of the Vietnam War received when they came home. That really stuck with him. So when the opportunity arose to do something to on the commemoration of the 50th anniversary of the war's end, he really knew he wanted to do something. As he mentioned, his art was very different. He coming of age in the 60s with artist parents. He was really influenced by the pop artist Andy Warhol. He loved to work with found objects, and like Warhol and Klaus Oldenburg, this is a piece made from discarded NASCAR racing car parts. And so Steve's career actually began in the 90s. He was a successful businessman before that, including owning a machine tool manufacturing company. So he was very comfortable working with large industrial objects and the tools you needed to fashion them. This is another image of that. The NASCAR parts turned into a series of artworks. This is more of that series, which he called "This is where the rubber meets the road." So you can see his artwork is very high energy and very colorful. This is another example of a work he did, which he called Band Booty. It's actually, those are scissors that were confiscated by the Transportation Safety Administration from air travelers. And Steve wanted to depict how air travel had changed in this series, and then also, you know, just to get people thinking about like who was carrying these. It turns out a lot of hairdressers travel with their scissors and lost them to the TSA. So as you heard him say, a work to commemorate, a commemorative work, perhaps a war memorial was a real departure for him. So he started engaging veterans very early in the process to bounce ideas off of and understand, the importance of the war to them and what they were thinking about in those days. And we included many of the interviews in the book. So the helicopter was an obvious starting point for him. As you heard him say, he'd done that blinged out rhinestone helicopter sculpture, which was very, very different, and which he called Ride-em-copter. He had done that previous to starting the commemorative sculpture for Vietnam. And it seemed, it was a natural thing since he'd done one before. And then of course, Vietnam was the helicopter war. So this next video, for those of you who, I know there are a lot of veterans here today, but for those who are not so familiar with the role of the Huey, this video gives some information.
Ex-husband was
So many veterans had contact with Hueys in the war. Many service members did. Whoops. Sorry about that. The helicopter obviously was a big fixture of the war. Many of the men and women who served rode in them or saw them, relied on them. And of course, many were killed on them as well. Steve worked with a nonprofit that was created by Army veterans that restores military helicopters. And it was that group that helped Steve find a Huey and uncover its history. And this video will talk a little bit about that.
I've just taken delivery of 174, a Huey helicopter. That's been restored to the point that now I can use it as my canvas to create art out of it for Take Me Home Huey, my project. My Huey's in the background, 174. It's going in this military tent that I'm leaning against right here, and it's a big tent. It's 64 feet long by about 24 feet wide by about 15 feet high. And if everything goes well, before the moon comes up tonight, we'll have the tent up. Oh, well, we need an enclosure where we can be fairly secure, keep some of the dust off, so it will be a headquarters for us.
So the restoration team dubbed the Huey number 174 after its serial number. And I was playing twice, sorry about that. So the first step was restoring it, and that was done in by Lighthorse Legacy in Arizona. And they, as I mentioned, they're a group of veterans, all of them volunteers. It took more than 6 months for them to take that wreck of a Huey that had been sitting in a boneyard for probably a decade or more and fashion it into a Huey that looked like a Huey from 1969. And even before the Huey was found and restored, Steve began working on his concepts for the piece, which he was doing at his base in Palm Springs. And you saw that the Lighthorse Legacy delivered the helicopter to him at the Palm Springs Air Museum, where they put up that tent so Steve could start applying his artwork. So in this video, he talks about his thought process for the art that he applied to the Huey.
First off, I'll start looking at the helicopter itself, the Huey helicopter, as a blank canvas. I imagine that the tail boom area, to me, it was kind of like a tattoo in a soldier's arm. So what would I put on my tattoo? What would my tattoo be of? And I thought, if you're a soldier in Vietnam, your mind is probably concerned about getting home and also thinking about the things back home. What is it that you're thinking about? Well, thinking about my girlfriend, maybe mom's apple pie, maybe my car. And then things really got more serious as you came up to the main cabin area. And there, I was able to find out the names of all the helicopter squadrons that served in Vietnam, along with their call signs, and then included the nicknames in a graffiti style form. And then I intermixed that with a mule pack, a trunk, and duffel bags, along with speakers to signify the music of the times, and then interwove all of that with the stars and stripes of the American flag, as well as the medevac cross that you see on the front nose of the aircraft. Yeah, the Red Cross was really used for medevac. In part of its lifetime, this helicopter 174 was a medevac. My project focuses on is a day in the life of this helicopter when it was shot down on February 14th, 1969, when it was going in for a medevac rescue. Now, the inside of the helicopter I wanted to treat, it was a sacred area. After all, these are where a lot of the wounded were carried, some of the dead for sure. I had to really think about what I wanted to do. Well, there were some extra parts that were left over, and I had suspended things before with different projects, and I thought this would be an ideal spot to suspend some of the gauges, as an example, the aircraft gauges, some of the honeycomb and sheet metal and other parts, damaged parts that were a part of this helicopter. So that's what I did, an installation of these parts suspended in the interior of the helicopter. And then included, I had fabricated a time capsule, and I thought, well, this would be ideal to have some letters from these soldiers that they sent home. It's been quite a journey to think about what I could do as an artist. It took a lot of thought and research to come up and think of this as a way to transform it, and I think it's worked out very, very well.
So you heard Steve mention that the helicopter was shot down, and that information was uncovered by the veterans who helped restore the helicopter. They traced its history all the way from its entry into the Army in '67 to its end of service in the late '90s, and they saw this gap in the service record, and then, digging through incident reports, found the incident report of this shoot down in, it was actually Valentine's Day, 1969. The Huey 174 was serving as a medevac helicopter with the 15th Medical Battalion of the 1st Cavalry. And it was going in for landing to pick up wounded and was shot down with 5 men aboard. And 2 of those men did not survive that day. And Steve then decided, after learning of the story, to also turn the helicopter into a personal memorial to those 2 men, Stephen Schumacher and Gary Dubach. So their names are included in the sculpture. So for Steve, the transformation of this, wrecked and shot down Huey into a colorful artwork, it really became symbolic of the need for healing of the many combat soldiers encounter, especially those with PTSD. And I think he knew instinctively of the power of art to heal, but he was still surprised at the reception that the artwork received. And but first, I want to go back and tell you a bit about the entire project. Steve commissioned a documentary film about the project, and the filmmakers followed him throughout the creation of the process and the beginning of the sculpture's journey on the traveling exhibition. And they followed some veterans who became involved in the project as well. So in the documentary, you see the helicopter come back to life or take on a new life. And you also see that these vets become energized on this journey as too, and many of them have PTSD. So this is the story of parallel journeys of healing and restoration. The documentary was finished in early 2017 and aired that year on PBS stations nationwide, and it went on to win an Emmy from the local Los Angeles Motion Picture Academy for Best Arts Programming. Steve also commissioned a song from composer, songwriter Jeannie Cunningham, who you see here recording it. It's called Take Me Home, Huey. But the sculpture is really the centerpiece of the project. And beginning in late 2015, it began its national tour. to 13 states. And here you see it, this is at the New York City Veterans Day Parade. Steve really, as I mentioned, wanted folks to see, wanted as many veterans as possible to see the sculpture. It was also exhibited at the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum's Companion Facility in Virginia, and at the Henry Ford Museum in Dearborn, Michigan. And the reception was, enormous. Many, veterans wanted to touch the sculpture, and, they reacted by having conversations with each other, meeting, new friends, and talking about their experiences in combat. And many told Steve that they had never had these conversations before. And, that can be one of the, a key step for, especially for those with PTSD, in starting the process to heal, is really being able to articulate their combat experience and the trauma that they suffered. So it really opened doors for several veterans who came in contact with it to seek help. And when it came time to write the book, Steve, he wanted readers to understand that concept of art as a healing tool and a catalyst for conversation that can lead to healing. So he sought out and interviewed Melissa Walker. Melissa is a psychotherapist who has started a program at Walter Reed for active duty service members. It's an art program that engages combat veterans who have all of whom who've had traumatic brain injury, which is a leading injury in our most recent wars. Many of them also have PTSD. Her program is called Creative Forces. It's jointly sponsored by the Department of Defense and the National Endowment for the Arts. And I'll let Melissa tell you about what she does.
Art therapy is a form of psychotherapy in which trained and credentialed art therapists invite different types of populations who have perhaps been traumatized or are going through some kind of medical or mental health issue. We allow for them to express using the art making process. They have a hard time verbalizing what they've been through, not only due to stigma associated with, or secrecy, if you're in a special unit in the military, also because of a verbal shutdown that occurs in a traumatized individual in the speech language area of the brain. They are intimidated at first, and sometimes they look at you like, what are you asking me to do? But once they get into the process and they start exploring the materials, oftentimes all of that melts away. When they're trained in the military, they're trained to be very focused in those moments when they're on missions, when they're, shooting a gun. You get into this flow state, and I think what they're finding is when they are engaging in the art making, they're in a similar type of flow state. They're also self-reflecting, and so that helps them overcome that intimidation. We've seen a lot of work surrounding identity, and so that's where the masks come in.
So Melissa, I'm excited to hear about your therapy, the mask therapy, and how that works. Can you enlighten me?
Sure. So one common directive that many art therapists use across different treatment populations is mask making. And so I think that a blank canvas or a blank sheet of paper might be a little too intimidating, and there's something about the way that this encompasses the invisible moves of war, envelops the brain, that allows for them to really start to self-reflect and then begin to speak with the art therapist about it.
So it's a catalyst for getting these feelings out and expressing themselves through a three-dimensional piece of art. So I see some parallels between the project that I've done and what you're doing. The helicopter became such a touchstone for these veterans or active service members that in the sense that it releases emotions, it's a catalyst for conversation, and it gets veterans out of their own skin in a sense.
Yes, it's very similar with the masks. I think that they're tactile, and We know, researchers know, that trauma is sensory. It's sight and it's sound and it's smell and it's the feeling of that moment. And as they approached the Huey, they did begin to share experiences both with you and with each other. And that similar kind of tactile experience occurs when a service member or a veteran is engaging in art therapy. While I was in school, I was studying trauma, and when we were studying post-traumatic stress, I realized that I had been around my grandfather my whole life and had observed the impact that war had on his psyche, and then decided that I'd like to work with the military population. Unfortunately, I never got to introduce this to him, but now I'm hopefully impacting others like him.
So it's not just fine art or painting that Melissa and her colleagues have discovered can be therapeutic. Creative Forces offers music and dance as well as Melissa's class. And it's now being rolled out nationwide and is also available to veterans through VA and other organizations. One of the graduates of Melissa's program was Chris Stowe, who you saw in that previous video, and I'm going to show you more about Chris. He spent 24 years in the Marine Corps. He served several tours in Iraq and suffered both TBI injury and PTSD. And he found art making so helpful that after leaving the Marines, he started a program in Florida for veterans. And this next video is about Chris's experience.
I had somebody ask me one time what post-traumatic stress felt like, and I said it was like having a beehive in your chest. So sometimes it's quiet, sometimes it's been hit by a stick, and it kind of goes through, but it's always there.
Chris, first off, I want to say thank you for your service. And, when you were in the Marine Corps, what was your rank, and can you tell me what you were doing?
I, for some reason, chose to be on the bomb squad, so explosive ordnance disposal. I spent a good amount of my time taking apart bombs on the side of the road in Afghanistan, Iraq, Africa, and places like that. A lot of people talk about military folks self-medicating, whether it be by alcohol or by drugs or some sort of other behavior. I kind of self-medicated by going back out on deployments. Like I would volunteer to go back out. That was much easier than realizing that I had some issues and coming home to kind of address them. Yeah, so I think when I started going on back-to-back deployments and I started being exposed to a few of the things that that I was, at one point I had 6 or 7 guys that worked for me that lost their limbs. I had 2 guys that got killed that worked for me. So those things kind of happen, and in the moment you don't really have time to process those. You can't really process those. They kind of get stuffed back into a box, and you just go back on the next mission or the next deployment, and then you come home and and your daughter wants to play, and it's if you open that up, that spot in you that allows for that kind of emotion, then everything else kind of comes with it. It makes it really difficult when you're in the grocery store and someone drops something in another aisle, and you get this noise that you're not accustomed to hearing, and you respond to it like you did when you were deployed. And those two things aren't supposed to mix, I don't think, but they have a habit of kind of shoving themselves into your normal life, and that ends up being really hard to deal with. To separate out between normal life and deployed life, and deployed life was just easier because I knew everything was a threat there. I knew everything was a hazard there. When I'm back at home, I wasn't sure. My wife is the one that said, sat me down after probably 10, we were probably married about 10 or 12 years at that point. And she told me, I love you, and the kids love you. If you don't get some help, we're gonna leave. And that was a very real kind of moment for me.
Chris, tell me about the art therapy program that you did.
I drew when I was a kid, and I doodled when I was a kid, and I always did it, and I always had it around me, and then I always thought, well, it's time to put away childish things, and it's time to go be this big bad Marine, and that kind of thing. So I had preconceived notions, probably as a grown adult, that art therapy is, it's not for me. But I had never found something that resonated with me that helped me get to kind of the root of what was wrong, because I didn't want to explain it anymore. So when I did art therapy or when I did the mask making process, I didn't have to say a word. I just put it down on paper, I put it down on canvas, or I put it down on a mask. And it was readily apparent what I was feeling. This is it's kind of a self-portrait. I didn't know it was going to be a self-portrait when I did it. So it was how I felt on the inside, angry, a demon. I felt like the things that I had done, how could I be a normal person, you know, kind of on the outside. So I got a traumatic brain injury on one side of my head. So this is kind of like, this wire reminded me of tripwires for roadside bombs. So that's why I grabbed it and I put it in there and coming out of my head. And then I had it done in one sitting, actually. And after I did that, I asked to every one of my extra appointments in my schedule to be filled with art therapy. So I did it there, and I asked if I could learn how to oil paint. And she kind of laughed and told me, she said, no one's ever asked to learn how to oil paint before. But that's what I did. So that's where I learned oil painting, which then took me into glass, funny enough. There probably wasn't a better medium to kind of communicate the invisible wounds of war than the transparent medium of glass. So I got this idea in my head several years ago that I was going to start up a glass blowing program.
We have a space that veterans can come to on Sunday mornings for free, and we learn how to work as a team, we learn how to process things.
It has a very campfire-like quality to it, and when I mean campfire, I mean like what kind of comes out with people when they're sitting around a campfire.
I know that whenever I was traveling my project around, there seemed to be a brotherhood that was associated with it.
So back when I was active duty and I was a master gunnery sergeant and I was running teams and we were running whole platoons, you heavily depended on the guy that was to the left and right of you. Unspoken communication was used, hand and arm signals were used, and then you played on the strengths and the weaknesses of the men that were around you. It happens exactly the same way in the glass blowing program. If I need something, I know I can look to somebody that's to the left or right of me and they're going to get what I need. And it's a trust. It's a trust that I haven't found anywhere else other than in this program with other veterans.
Good job. Zach, Melissa, bam.
There's dependency upon the person that's working with you, and you have a very heavy, very real sense of purpose with what you're doing with this glass that's at 2,100 degrees Fahrenheit.
You've got to be on your toes, and I know that at one moment I was reaching out, and one of your assistants grabbed my hand. He said, "No, that's hot."
You can't think of anything else when you're working in glass. So I think it makes you very present in the moment, which is very important to me.
And that's got to transform into a serious experience for those that are working with you here.
Find something. Find something. Whether it's glass blowing or woodworking or metal fabricating or photography or taking a walk or meeting up with a few people every couple of times a week. I don't have the schematic on what heals.
But I see that probably there's parallels between what you're doing with glass blowing, working with veterans, and the veterans that came to see my project.
It's the sense of putting your hands on something real. It's touching things. It's a very sensory-laden kind of process that I think was very similar to the Take Me Home Huey project. There are multitudes of opportunities out there. I just think that art is one of the best ways to do it.
So as Chris started this program, it's at the Moran Art Center in Florida for veterans, and the proceeds from the sale of the Take Me Home Huey book will go to support the art programs that are affiliated with creative forces, programs like Chris's. So just to wrap up, we created a book trailer that or a short film that kind of sums up the whole project and describes the book, which is what I'll play next. It's very short, and then I'll take your questions.
It began as a way to thank and to honor veterans. And to raise awareness of PTSD. The Take Me Home Huey sculpture set off on a tour of the country in 2015. It became a national event.
My main reason is to bring awareness to the 50th commemoration of the Vietnam War and veterans. So it will be a healing Huey.
Everywhere the sculpture goes, it sparks conversation.
It's almost like we're getting finally validated. We've all finally come home.
And it fosters connection.
It was being resurrected to go back into service. And I felt I could be resurrected and be helpful in some way.
It's grown to include a song, an Emmy-winning film, and now, Take Me Home Huey is a book. The story, told in stunning photographs of a work of art that created a pathway to healing.
So as you saw, the book is available on the Take Me Home Huey website, Amazon, and other places. And that's the end of my talk. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Claire. That was really amazing. I have to just make a couple of comments about the book because I read the book and I loved it. And my first comment is his respect and honor for the veterans and his searching for understanding their experience so that he could transform that into his art that's amazing. You really feel the connections there, and the research that he did on this particular Huey, the one that he used, and that's really great. The second thing I love about the book, or maybe this is the first thing I love about the book, the photographs are unbelievable. It's just such a history of the time and a history of putting his artwork together. They're gorgeous. Where did all these photographs come from? You guys see these?
Oh, well, quite a few. We searched, Nicole Toish Butcher was the photo researcher, and she and I have worked on documentaries together. She did a lot of the photo research. So, I mean, they're from all over Getty, they're from archives around the country. The archives were open. We finished the photo editing but right before COVID hit. So we were able to get things from the National Archives and other places. And then Steve had photographs made of the artwork, and then some are just the candid photographs that people took as the Huey was on tour and visiting venues around the country.
Amazing, really makes the book special. And now, where is the Huey now? Can people go visit it somewhere?
Yeah, so it's permanently installed now at the Palm Springs Air Museum in Palm Springs, where Steve was working with the tents and putting the artwork together.
Oh, right. That's great. Is there anybody else that has any other questions or wants to talk about their experience in a Huey or with the art therapy? The art therapy piece is amazing too. No, are we good? Everybody's good? All right, well, I'd like to announce the winner of the beautiful book. Oh, it's right here in the chat. What a beautiful and respectful book. We had a drawing, and the winner of the Take Me Home Huey is Tom Sinnott. Tom Sinnott. Thanks, Tom. Thanks for coming. And we'll get that book to you somehow.
Took me 58 years, but I finally won something.
Today's your
very
lucky
much.
day.
Thank you
Today's
so
your lucky
much.
day. All right. Well, thank you so much, Clare Nolan, for coming. And the information to buy the book from Booked is in the chat. So give them a call, or like Claire said, it's also on Amazon, or I'm sure the Duxbury Free Library might have a copy of it too.
Or you
Thanks so
can
much,
order it
Claire.
through the takemehomehuey.org website.
takemehomehuey.org. Oh, and also my advice to you, go on YouTube and Google the song, because I played it today and it's been in my ear all day and it's really fun. It's special. So try that too.
Thank
All right.
you
Thanks
so
for the
much,
experience,
Claire.
Claire.
Thank you. This was wonderful.
Thanks, Tom.
Really appreciate it.
So good. Take care.
Thank
Bye,
you for
everybody.
having me.